And let me introduce myself. My name is Christine Gordon. I am the Programming Manager for Readings. And on behalf of Readings and on behalf of Giramondo Press, it is a treat to have you all here. And of course, today, one of my extraordinary, fortunate things to do is to introduce these two gentlemen to you both, to you all. Of course, we all know Pi as a legendary poet, someone who was born in Greece, brought up in Fitzroy. He is the person that has been recording who Melbourne is, what Melbourne is, and why Melbourne is. His latest, most recent book, the third book in his Fitzroy trilogy, won the prestigious, and let us all have a little moment to imagine this, the prestigious 2020 Judith Wright Calanthe's Award for Poetry at the Queensland Literary Awards. What an honour. Congratulations to you, Pi. That's such an extraordinary achievement. Ivor is the publisher of Giramondo Book Imprint. He is the Whitlam Professor in the Writing and Society Research Centre at the Western Sydney University. He was the founding editor of Heide, the co-founder of the Sydney Review of Books. He has written on many aspects of Australian literature, art, architecture, and literary publishing. He has been one of the great champions of Pi's work, and certainly one of the great champions of poetry. It is how I first met Ivor, when he started to introduce me to his extraordinary range of poetry books that he was publishing. And I have always been overwhelmed with gratitude that someone like this exists. Over to you, Ivor.
Thanks very much, Christine. That was a very nice introduction. I think we'll just get straight into it, Pi. Nominally, this book is, it's called Heide, and nominally it's about the artists circle around John and Sunday Reid at Heide in Melbourne, from a period of, I guess, roughly 40 years, 1920s through to 1930s through to the 1960s. But Sunday Reid doesn't actually make an appearance in the book until halfway through. True to the epic tradition, she enters in medias res, that's in the middle of things, quite literally. And that's the nature of the book. While it's focused, at the same time, it's extremely expansive. And that's where I'd like to start, really, because you actually start in 1678, I think, with William Davenant's, the playwright, the Restoration playwright, his development of the Movable Scenery, a dramatic device. And I thought, or we thought actually, that you might start by reading that poem,
Sure.
Which is one of the first poems in the collection.
The Voyage. On the 19th of April, 1770, the coast of Australia came into view. Go on. In 1661, William Davenant invented movable scenery. Shakespeare couldn't have known. That's an actor for you. Ants don't sleep. Dogs don't eat frogs. The stock list on the first fleet included 87 chickens and 29 sheep. Nothing but scrub, sometimes sand, sometimes stone. Now, using one finger, move the leaf in the bowl to one side. In 1891, Monet drew 15 haystacks. Where am I? Mount Hopeless, Mount Deceptive, Mount Disappointment, Mount Terrible, Mount Despair. Lemon juice dissolves the fossil and the fishbone. Amy Macpherson was buried out there with a live telephone. Say knock knock. Who's there? I guess you can't talk. I said bees are deaf. This isn't Saudi Arabia. There are rivers, human hair, and fingernails. There are goats in Somalia. But as I said, in 1661, William Davenant invented movable scenery.
So this is a piece of scenery that's been moved onto the stage right at the beginning of the performance. And, you know, there are those characteristic features of your poetry here, proverbs, statistics, definitions,
Information,
aphorisms, facts, of course, facts, endless facts, and inventories. Is that part of the movable scenery? Why are you bringing in the concept of movable scenery here?
Well, that poem appears about 4 or 5 pages into the beginning of the book, and it was to establish Australia as a zone, as a place that we were going to talk about, which is really the beginnings of sort of the discovery of Australia. And William Davenant was actually considered to be some kind of relative to Shakespeare. And so he extended Shakespeare's plays by putting this feature in theatre of movable scenery. And I love the idea that no matter where you go, you're actually in a fixed point, in this case on the stage, which is the beginning of the book. And so all this background motion just whizzes around at 1,000,000 miles an hour, facts, figures, information, and this vortex, but you are the still point. And in the still point is what the basic structure of the book is, because although it looks like I'm going all around the world looking at art and looking at the development of art all over Australia till we get to Heide, it's actually only one, sort of single-minded element in the whole book. And so Heide is the true sort of center of this book, although it doesn't actually appear with John and Sunday Read, as you said, until about halfway through the book. And that's because I started to find that the history of Heide doesn't start with 2 individuals. They don't start with John and Sunday Read, but actually keep going back and back. And this is what I found and why the book was written. It was kind of written backwards, because I found out that the reason John and Sunday Read went out to Heide, out to Heidelberg, was because of the Impressionists. And the reason the Impressionists went out there was because of Bouvelot, the painter who came from Fitzroy. And so the idea of Fitzroy connected to Heide was actually quite a startling kind of connection, because I also had a connection with Heide. And so, like from the 70s onwards. And so
that's through Barrett Reed, your friendship with Barrett Reed and
Sweeney Reed.
Sweeney Reed, who was the son of Joy Hester, adopted by Sunday Reed. So by that means, you really entered the center of the vortex in a way, I guess.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm on the real periphery of it, I mean, John Sunday Reed, they on 2 occasions asked me to go to their place via Barrett Reed, but I didn't like artists, I thought they were just wankers and still do really. But and so I didn't know what I was going to say to these people, I didn't know who they were or what they were about or what their significance was. And I think that's one of the reasons that Sweeney Reed liked me, was because I wasn't really party to all this art stuff. I was only interested in poetry. And the only reason I went out sort of to Heide and St. Andrews was because of Barrett Reed, who was an editor of Overland magazine, and he was going to publish some of my poems.
There's a couple of things I want to pick up on there. First of all, you talked about the discovery of Australia, but that poem you quoted, has the so-called discoverers in the middle of a landscape that disappoints their expectations and in which they're constantly knocking or hearing knocking, but they don't know who's there. So, there is both there and, throughout the book, a sense of priority as well, that going back you could go back a lot further.
Yeah, certainly. But by the 1600s, you know, you have people like, you know, Dampier discovering Australia. So, I mean, it depends on how far back you want to go. So, but it was really just, when I found out the thing about movable scenery, it really excited me because I was already going backwards and backwards. And then I you know, I've also got a sort of a Captain Cook discovery, or where I actually merge Captain Cook's discovery of Australia with its bicentenary celebrations. I actually do a cut in there. So the past and the present become melded into one. And this is the thing about the vortex, about the movable scenery. I keep shifting the background scenery, but really what I'm looking at in terms of art and poetry in this book is the trajectory and the discovery of Australia, the white discovery of Australia, comes with all the baggage of Europe, and in particular England. And so the in terms of art, they're trying to find an art form that fits Australia, but they can't see it. And they can't see it because they've got all this baggage in the background that they're taking along with them. So
it's not just aesthetic baggage. I mean, I think you're very, very clear on the domination of the English in cultural institutions and in the wealth of the country. I mean, you do trace in your. I mean, there are a number of threads. There's art history, there's cultural history, there's political history, there's a history of anarchism, for example. But in terms of local art history and the institutions, the state galleries, the National Gallery, and so on, you're very clear, and you give portraits of the oppressors, that is the English functionaries that have been appointed to control and actually to keep modernism at bay in the country.
Well, that's actually very true. What astounded me in the research of this book was that in terms of Melbourne in particular, the crucible that contained the university, the art gallery, the library, the judiciary were all melded into one particular person, and that was Redmond Barry, and because he lays the foundation stone of the University of Melbourne Uni, he lays the foundation stone of the library. Inside the library is the art gallery. All the books come from him, and he's the chief judge. I mean, and so the development of art was, you know, inseparable from all these other institutions. And in Melbourne, it was really stark to see. And in particular in relationship to Heide and the demise of Heide with the Ern Malley hoax, that these institutions weren't enough to stomp on the modernism. They had to pull in the army also. In particular, you know, Macaulay and Stewart in particular, but also John Kerr is involved. So for me, in terms of the anarchist history, in terms of Fitzroy history, in terms of Heide history, all this thing was just incredible to find that the upper echelon of the culture was actually determining what we were going to look at and how we were going to appreciate this. And so
here's the thing. You're very good on the dissident elements, the migrant artists, the women artists, the Aboriginal artists, and the kind of opprobrium that they meet. But the paradox is that the patrons who are at the very center of this web of modernism are precisely from the class that you scorn and who control those institutions.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a much more complicated argument, which I actually deal with in the book. The thing about John and Sunday Reid, and one of the cases I make in the book, is that Heide is really a history of anarchism in art. And the reason I say that is because John and Sunday Reid were turned on to art through the writings of Herbert Reid, a well-known anarchist in England in the 30s, in particular in his book Art Now. And so they found this incredibly exciting. And also that the people that they associated with them were actually known anarchists. They called themselves anarchists. I mean, Max Harris is a known anarchist. He declares himself to be an anarchist. I mean, Stuart, not Stuart, James Macaulay, you know, in his early
younger
stages, again,
in his younger days.
in his younger days. But this is when they're all young. You see, that he's an anarchist. I mean, they understood anarchist ideology, and they were publishing anarchists and reading anarchist treatises and books and were trying to create an alternative.
But you give the you give the ancestry in detail. I mean, Sunday Reid was a Baillieu. John Reid's family were old grazier stock, weren't they, from Tasmania? Is that right? So they came from money. There's an interesting line that you quote in one of the poems. An anarchist, Lenin said, was a bourgeois turned inside out.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, that's true, isn't it? Isn't that part of the argument?
Well, one of the ways I see it is that sort of when it comes to art, it's really not a good idea to see art in respect as the hierarchy of society. You know, the working class and the lumpen proletariat down below, and the rich and the upper class up the top. Because what happens in art, and this was actually borne out by John Berger. It's sort of ways of seeing, for people who might know his book, and he talks about the artists actually come from all stratas of the hierarchy, from the top to the bottom, and so he establishes that it's not actually a horizontal notion of the hierarchy, but with art it's a vertical cut down the whole of the hierarchy, where all the artists and the disenfranchised, and that doesn't mean that, you know, if you're rich you can't cry. I mean, and in particular, when it comes to anarchist history, I mean, anarchists, you know, they were princes. I mean, Kropotkin was a prince. You know, there's a lot of anarchists who come from the upper echelons of society who actually saw what was going on and didn't want to be part of it, or alternatively wanted to change it. In particular, what happens is with John and Sunday Reid is that they do a modern contract with the artist. Like in the book, I talk about the kind of contract some of the artists used to have. Like if they were an artist was being commissioned to do a painting, they would write out a contract, and they would say you can use so many dollars worth of vermilion, or so many dollars for gold, so much. Then they would say you would have to do the face, and then you would have to do the cow in the background, or you'd have to do this. It was all written in the contract of how the painting was supposed to come out. And so it was actually being dictated to, or in fact written or painted by the patron themselves. And then in the contract, they said, well, in exchange, we will give you so many trees that you can burn in winter. We'll give you so much grain. We'll give you so much money. Now, if you translate that into John and Sunday Reid's interaction with the artists, it's very much in that mode, in that they saw themselves as being obliged to give the artists that they supported shelter, money, the nutrients of books and information, also suggestions, also aesthetics. And this was the vortex in which all these people existed. That's why it was so exciting.
There was a cost too, and the trajectory of the book, the last, 50 pages where it's all disintegrating, and particularly, the way the male artists were letting their egos run rampant at the expense of the women, the way the sexual freedom was, causing a great toll on relationships as well. So there was something, I think you actually call it Eden at
Yeah.
one point, but it's paradise lost as well. I mean, ultimately it disintegrates.
Yeah, look, I really feel for all the people towards the end. You know, I really do, because to me it was just an absolutely amazing experiment, an amazing slap in the face of public taste to try and sort of create an alternative when there wasn't an awful lot that they could rely on. I mean, most of their models that they took came from overseas and in Europe, and through the anarchist movement in particular, and also the rebels and the dissidents within all these organizations. And they were trying to create something, and they put everything on their line. They put their money on the line, they put their bodies on the line, they put their intellects on the line, they put their aesthetics on the line, they put absolutely everything into it. And to see it collapse was really, you know, very sad, you know, I mean, because they were all very beautiful people. I mean, a friend of mine once said, all my friends are beautiful. And I agree, you know, when you have friends and they are beautiful people, and you know, both physically and mentally, you know, you just adore them. And I think that that's what was happening there. And it was they didn't have a rule book to find out how to live communally. They didn't have any models that they could go to. They were trying to find models. I mean, Herbert Read, for instance, you know, advised Peggy Guggenheim, you know, to start an art gallery, and it was that impetus there that was translated into John and Sunday Reid for them to start an art gallery too in Melbourne.
Yeah.
You know, that was one of their dreams. You know, it comes out of Herbert Read.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up on a comment you made earlier that all artists are that you still think artists are wankers. Because I'm not going to let you get away with all this stuff necessarily. I assume you mean they're wankers because they don't use words. Is that right?
Well, I mean, if you go to these art gallery openings and stuff, you know, you know, so much of it is so trite. And, you know, but I say that about poetry too. You know, most poetry books are trite. And you know, I've got no time for novels. I've got no time for plays. And art, I'm actually, I starting to like more and more, mainly because of Sandy, my partner, who sort of opened my eyes, I suppose, to, you know, what was going on. And also she opened my eyes up to the connection that I had with Heide, you know, because to me it was just, you know, a bit of a poetry scene rather than an art scene, you know.
Yes, I think that's really moving in the whole book, the way it does read like an education as well, and the way you insert yourself into it, especially towards the end. But I just wanted to move the discussion on to the texture of your own writing, or your own art, if you like, and to come back to, you know, your use which of riddles, proverbs, statistics, in extraordinary facts. And I just wondered if you could read some of the Percy Grainger poem, which, you know, really brings that texture, empirical texture, I guess, but also very dramatic, very rhythmical texture of words to the fore.
Well, I'll read the poem and we can talk about it.
Yeah.
No. Percy Grainger. Percy Grainger was born in Brighton, Australia in 1882, where he was taught to play the piano. A whale's heart beats 9 times a minute. A shrimp's heart is in its head. Moths don't have stomachs. Giraffes don't have vocal cords. Between 1901 and 1905, he made extensive recordings in Europe of old folk songs. Mushrooms break through concrete. A cock's egg is a simpleton's. It's a good year for kidney beans. Microwave popcorn jump about the bins. In 1914, to make an ox of it, he moved to the United States and became a citizen. Fish blow bubbles during sex. Bees choreograph what what they know. There's no mention of cats in the Bible. Tulips originated in Istanbul. He wrote a lot of serious music too, and a collection of what he called fripperies, like An English Country Garden. Jellyfish hang around in smacks. Apple pips contain cyanide. Cashews are native to the Amazon. Forget-me-nots are everyone's. In 1928, he married an Aryan princess, Ella Strom, at the Hollywood Bowl in front of 22,000 people. Wasps taste like pine nuts. Basil should be torn, not cut. Earwigs are vegetarian. Leaf beetles suck the leaves of plants. In 1935, he financed a museum at Melbourne University in his honour. Forgive us our trespasses. In 26 years later, died building an unusual music machine in his cellar. Large trees give us more shade than fruit. Azaleas are protected. You pick up olives with a spoon, not fork. Do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do. Think of it all as a piano scroll called turnips.
Right, over to you.
Now, the thing about that poem is that what I did, I got his, English Country Garden, because I'm a heathen. That's all I really knew about him until I actually got into him. And the idea was that sort of, it goes, how many kinds of sweet flowers grow in an English country garden? I'll tell you now some that I know, and those I miss so surely pardon. Now that what I did is I took his biography, which was the speaking part, and then I just filled it up with, instead of details like, daffodils and hearties and meadow sweets and all that, I filled them up with facts, so that the was just this information overload just coming at you. And the reason I did that was because he was once asked, what is that poem, what is that song really all about? And his stock answer was, it's about turnips, because he was sick to death of people asking him what art was about, basically. So this poem is actually about turnips as much as anything else. Now, the thing about, I like the idea of throwing facts in. Ages ago, I discovered that facts were being used against the working class. When I was doing a magazine called 9 to 5, which was a workers' magazine in the 80s, I did a remarkable thing. I went to the Australian Bureau of Statistics when you could actually walk in before computers or anything. And I wrote a poem about it. It goes, I went to the Australian Bureau of Statistics and asked them for one of everything. I got how many umbrellas they made, how many pickled onions, how many dams, deaths, dealers, doctors, drivers, ducks there is, was, gas, gates, geese, gherkins. And I realized that these facts, these bits of information could be used as images. And as a poet, I'm interested in the use of images. I'm interested as image as metaphor. And so I started to develop the poetry of facts and information, because when you get into the book, you're actually being bombarded with all this information, but actually they're all converted into facts. So it's not just information where I just elaborate about, how many hearts a monkey's got or whatever. I actually just state it as a fact.
And can you tell us where you get the facts from?
Now, well, this is what I found. Initially, I started getting all my facts out of books. I'd go to readings. I'd look up all the shelves, all the information shelves. The science shelves. I'd be going through them. I'd be going to secondhand places and picking up all children's books about science. Because they actually wrote the facts plain and simple. And I was actually interested in the plain and simple fact. And so I started to collect these facts, or what were exciting facts that I was, interested in and facts about mathematics also. It wasn't just facts, about how many politicians were on a pin. I was using science and information from everywhere. And when the computer came along, I thought, oh, you beauty. So I jumped on the computer looking for facts. And after a while, I noticed that the facts that you can get off the computer are boring as shit. They get regurgitated by different sites over and over again. And you can actually see these people thinking, and I thought, well, that's no good, because anyone looking for facts, they're just going to pick up the same facts. But books were something that the computer world was not using, but I still was. And I thought, great, this obsolete sort of information bin will be where I will go and where I'll pull my facts out. And that was fantastic, because I was able to take my time. I knew there was no one looking over my shoulder, because I could just go through this thing. All right, I want that, I want this bit, I can cheat here, I don't have to cheat here, and put it all together. So
I think you told me that this was largely in op shops and secondhand bookshops, because the very people who were using the internet for their facts were getting rid of their books, their encyclopedias and dictionaries and proverbs, and you can pick them up very cheaply there.
And remaindered books too. Yeah. Look, I found that, like most people, especially younger people, their whole notion is, I need to be in the future. I need to know the computer. I need to be able to work on the computer. But what interests me is that you can't have revolutionary poetry without having some kind of tradition that can get you there. You actually need the tradition to be able to move forward, to build on it. And so, to me, the best part is always when you're in a state of transition. That is the most fruitful area to play in that crossover section. It's no good just jumping into the future and say, hey, here I am, I'm going to become a genius of some kind on the computer, and sort of dismiss the past. That can't, to me, that doesn't produce great literature. It's when you take the past with you and rework it into the future that you get the best nutrients.
I mean, it's not just about making the past present in the poems. Those facts, as you call them, have a kind of rhythmical function. They're actually expressionistic, because at moments of crisis or drama in the poem, suddenly there'll be this outburst of facts, some of which are themselves, like if it's an explosion of emotion, some of those will be explosive in nature. Isn't that right?
Yeah, yes, that's right. What I found is that once I wrote the poem and put the facts in, like facts that don't really belong, I'm just throwing them in. I mean, they're not as random as they sound, actually, but let's say I just throw them in. What I found was that when I went back to it and forgot how I constructed the poem, I couldn't actually dismantle those poems and sort of rewrite them. I couldn't work out where the facts were. They all seemed to belong somehow. And that was really exciting. But the other thing was that in one sense, that I was writing a kind of symbolist poetry. And I'm not talking about a symbolist poetry where you talk about the moon and the stars and, men and women as being, symbolist. But the notion that that facts turned into images that then took on their own life. And in one sense, you kind of go into a dream sequence with these facts, because really some of them are just, you can't instantly digest them. And so you kind of go into this dream, but I always take you back out. Like, I always take you back into the information that I'm playing with. And then sometimes that information, which is the point of the poem sort of thing, it goes into a dream while you go off onto these irrelevant facts, which are really quite interesting in their own right. And
so the effect is encyclopedic, basically.
Yes, I love the idea of a poetry of encyclopedia for sure. Good point. Yeah.
Why? Why do you like it so much?
I like the fact that sort of you can open up a huge book and just immerse yourself or swim in all this text, in all this information that is actually interesting, as opposed to that modernist notion that it's not interesting, it doesn't matter what it means. I do worry about what it means. I'm actually interested in meaning. I'm interested in content. My argument about modernism is that if content doesn't matter, then you won't mind if I use some. So I use content. I'm interested in content. I'm interested in saying something, and it's my something. But I'm also interested in challenging the techniques, re-swirling around the text, the information.
Yeah, that's the vortex idea again. But I'm interested in this encyclopedic movement from a specific incident or a specific place way out into the universe, because that's the way Fitzroy functions for you. I mean, Fitzroy is at the heart of all three of these epic works.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet it's the focus, it just builds into cosmos, really.
Yeah, well, the connection between like Heide and Fitzroy is huge. Like, I mean, you got the artists out at Heide who are coming into Fitzroy and painting. I mean, Vasiliev, he actually painted the laneways that I grew up in. Some of those pictures that Vasiliev has done is, straight, they're almost photographs of where I grew up. I mean, they're so good. Tony Birch also has that affinity with Vasiliev's paintings. I can virtually tell you the laneways that he painted those paintings in. There's no signpost, but I can tell you exactly the feeling, and he does capture it. But then sort of the Boyds, Arthur Boyd, Tucker, they all came to paint in Fitzroy, Yossel Berger.
And further back too.
Who's that, sorry?
Further back too, you've got connections to the previous generation.
Well, that's right, because if you look at Tom Roberts, he sort of grows up in Collingwood. He lives in Fitzroy, a block away from Bouvelet. He idolizes Bouvelet, who teaches Tom Roberts, and Tom Roberts wants to go out to where Bouvelet painted, so he goes out to Heide, and that and so the connection and. So the connection with Heide and Fitzroy and Tom Roberts, sorry, I'm talking Tom Phillips, Tom Roberts, is that Sunday Reid knew the Impressionists. She was painted by Streeton. The family had these painters come to dinner. She was not awed by the Impressionists, the Australian Impressionists. She understood what was going on there. In fact, one of the important things she emphasizes and continuously pushes with Sidney Nolan is that the landscape tradition has not finished in Australia, because they considered modernism not to be of landscape. Where she insisted that the job had not been finished. And I think that is one of her great contributions. But the other thing about landscape, and this is where Sweeney Reid becomes really important, is because, to understand Sweeney Reid proper, you've got to understand that the attack against modernism, or the reactionary forces against it, came at a time when surrealism was in the ascendancy. Now, the thing about surrealism is that it's where art and poetry merge. It is that moment where language, the text, and painting come together. In fact, it's argued that the surrealists were quite literary with all their dreams, you know. I mean, and
So I think this is your argument for concrete poetry as well. But I need you to make the point really quickly, because we haven't got much time, and I'd like to end with a reading, if that's okay.
yeah.
Because you mentioned Sunday Read, and I thought, well, why don't we finish with a reading about the relationship between Sunday Read and Joy Hester, the poem that you mentioned to me. 455, I think it was. 445.
What was the number?
Um,
Oh, Eden.
Yeah.
Okay. Eden. To be swept off one's feet.
Not the whole poem.
Not the whole poem. No.
It's just the bottom, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, that's it. Go ahead.
Well, I got so many to read. It's.
No, read that one. To be swept off one's feet.
Hang on. Okay. To be swept off one's feet is to lose all sense of discernment. Sunday knew her literature and would push John on to explain his outlook. Herbert Read came to them early. Sunday, 24. John, 4 years older, both from the upper echelons of society. Anarchism isn't an abstract idea, but an organic outgrowth with empathy at the heart of it. That's its secret. Some say they can see fire shooting out of a magnet. A or nay. John and Sunday were on the same wavelength. Communal relationships were a feature of Heide. No one asked for more than what they could give. A V sign with a palm shown outwards signifies victory. Facing inwards, an obscene gesture. One doesn't start with a theory. One discovers one's been going along with one since ever. The story gets told over and over. To yaw is to rock and roll from side to side. In 1923, Sunday was presented to society and fell in love with a gold digger who only wanted her money. The family didn't like him, but liberation comes at a price. They ran off to Europe together, chasing butterflies, and he gave her gonorrhea. She came back to Melbourne, tail between her legs, and now unable to have children. She knotted up her hysterias, as Rimbaud would have put it. But Bertrand Russell and D.H. Lawrence and Herbert Read and George Woodcock all came to the rescue and showed John and Sunday the way to free love. Every time an exhaust valve opens, there's a sudden rush of pressure. She pushed, he pulled, and together they became a couple. Only women know how to invade the male psyche. The proper management of light in a gallery is important to prevent the eye from being offended. They read The News from Nowhere by Russell Morris, Walt Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, and the anarchists. They were in love with everything and each other. I guess if I feel lucky, John said to Sunday one day, you must be feeling lucky also. A herd of goats in a dream is a sign of good fortune. John was fundamental to her being and vice versa. He had a great respect for her happiness and for others also. Aristotle taught that the fetus developed from a coagulum of menstrual blood. The kitten must have its face licked every so often.
Thanks very much, Pi. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I think we have to stop there, unfortunately.
Do we? Why don't we just keep going?
Well,
what are they going to do, chop us?
Yeah, Christine's going to chop us for sure. But the poem I wanted you to read was actually about Joy Hester, but we'll come. We'll come back. We'll come back to it. I think that really is the human heart of the book that you just quoted.
Well, it's wonderful. There's actually quite a few human hearts in there. So, what is it over now? I mean,
Christine, over to you.
I think what an extraordinary night. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your readings. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for your questions, Ivor. Thank you so much for giving us a
No,
new
thank you.
understanding and new appreciation of our laneways, of our past. We're so honoured to have you as part of our online program. It's such a treat to have an award-winning poet like yourself as part of Readings program. It means all the world to us. I was so delighted when you mentioned coming into Readings on your fact-finding missions.
It's
And
true.
I thought, oh, thank you so much for giving us that.
He
And for
didn't
giving-
buy
Mark,
any books, though. He just looked, he just browsed, he didn't buy anything.
I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure
my
that's not true at all. I'm
first
sure he
magazine.
spent all of the money that he earned as a poet at Readings.
He's not the only one.
Well, actually, my first poetry book was Reading sold in 1972, Fitzroy, and it sold for 10 cents, and that was expensive.
And I'm sure it was a bestseller as well. I think it's only fair to say that if we were, in fact, in one of the reading shop, that there would be overwhelming applause for you right now, that it would be very difficult to hear your words. But I would like to finish by thanking Ivor for his time and his dedication to all of you, to all of the poets in Australia, and in particular to you. I think he is one of your champions.
Oh, he definitely is, and he really is. He's magnificent.
He really
Thanks,
is.
Ivor.
He really is. And to each and every one of you, shall we finish with some words from PiO? Let us go to that part of the brain, controlling speech, discovered in 1852, and open it like David Brewster did in 1816 when he invented the caldoscope. Good night, everyone.
Ta.
Good night.
Thank you.